The ship drifted through the endless silence of space, carrying one man who had left behind the lights of human colonies to seek something no one else dared to find. His name was Elias, and he was not a soldier nor a conqueror. He was an explorer. Of the unknown, he believed that the stars carried secrets, and that somewhere in the vast darkness lay answers to questions no human had yet asked. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, as his small vessel passed through regions with no maps. He fed on ration packs, he repaired broken panels, he whispered to himself, just to keep the mind alive, because silence can eat a man faster than hunger. Then one day the silence was broken, not by a voice, but by a storm of light. His ship was caught in a pull he could not resist. It dragged him down toward the surface of a planet hidden from all charts. The landing was no gentle fall. Metal screamed against stone as the vessel crashed. Elias held onto the straps. Bruises cut his skin, yet he survived. He stepped outside, and what lay before him was not a barren rock, but a world that looked both alive and dead at the same time. The sky was pale green, the air thin but breathable, and the ground was filled with ruins of towers that once must have touched the clouds. He walked among broken pillars and shattered arches carved with symbols. No human had ever drawn. The silence here was different, not empty, but waiting, as if the stones themselves remembered voices long gone. Elias felt the weight of time pressing upon him. He picked up a shard of crystal glowing faintly in his hand, and wondered what kind of hands had shaped it. Before the deeper he went, the stranger it became. Light seemed to bend around corners. Whispers filled his ears, though no one stood near. Then, in the middle of a ruined hall, he saw her. She stood with her back turned, her figure outlined by a soft silver glow, her hair flowing like strands of light, her stillness perfect. Elias froze, his breath caught inside him. He thought perhaps he had lost his mind. Perhaps the planet was feeding illusions into his brain. Yet, when she moved, the ground itself seemed to breathe. She turned slowly, her eyes bright as stars met his, and in that instant every sound faded. Every wound and every scar on his body meant nothing. He whispered to himself words that slipped without thought. "She's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Her gaze held him still, and for a moment he felt she could see every thought inside his heart. Her eyes were not only eyes, they were windows showing both pain and warmth, and Elias felt as if he had waited all his life just for that one glance. He wanted to speak, but his throat was dry, his hands shook. Yet he did not fear her. There was something human in her presence, though he knew she could not be human. Air shimmered around her, and he realized she was not made of flesh as he was. She was light woven into form. She was memory given shape, and yet she was real enough that his chest ached as he looked at her. She stepped closer, her feet made no sound upon the cracked floor, and still her eyes did not leave his. Elias felt the pull of something greater than curiosity. It was as if she had been waiting for him, not just for days or years, but for centuries. The ruins around them seemed to sigh with relief at the meeting of two beings who should never have crossed paths. He wanted to ask who she was, but he could not. His lips moved, yet no sound came. She raised her hand, and though the distance between them remained, he felt warmth brush against his skin like a memory of sunlight. She tilted her head slightly as if studying him, and in her silence, he heard more than words. He heard loneliness, the kind that stretches over ages. He heard longing, the kind that burns even when hope is gone. For Elias, this was no ordinary encounter. It was not just discovery of ruins or survival of a crash. It was something deeper. It was the meeting of two worlds, one living, one lingering. And he knew with the certainty of his soul that this moment would change him forever. Behind her the walls glowed. Faintly symbols lit up across the stones, as if recognizing him, as if welcoming him. She was the key, and he had unlocked her without knowing. And as they stood facing each other, under the dying light of a forgotten sky, Elias whispered once more, this time not only to himself but to the universe, "She is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Elias watched her closely, his heart beating faster than it had in years. He could not understand how something so fragile and yet so powerful could exist on a planet so far from human reach. He wanted to speak, but words felt heavy on his tongue, so he simply stepped forward carefully. Keeping his eyes on her every movement, she remained calm as if she had expected him to approach all along, and the ruins around them seemed alive in response to her presence. Finally she spoke, and her voice was soft like wind through the crystal towers. It carried no threat, only curiosity, and a strange warmth that touched him deep inside. She called herself Lyra, and though the name was simple, it held a weight of meaning that Elias could not yet grasp. She told him she was not alive in the way he was, not flesh and blood, but consciousness preserved by her people in the crystals scattered across the ruins. Her words were strange, yet beautiful. She explained that long ago, her civilization had reached heights humans could only dream of. They had explored galaxies, built cities of light and knowledge, and yet they had vanished, leaving only memories trapped in crystal and energy. She was a fragment of what remained, a living memory, who had waited for someone who could understand the story of her people. Elias felt an ache in his chest as he listened. He realized that she was lonely, not just lonely for company, but lonely for understanding. She had witnessed centuries without anyone to share thought or emotion with, and now he was here, the first human who could see her fully and acknowledge her existence. He wanted to reach out and touch her, but he feared shattering the fragile form she held. She stepped closer slowly, her hand hovering over a glowing shard in the floor. The light from the crystal touched her face, making her glow brighter. She told him stories of her people, of worlds that once shone with music of stars and rivers of energy. She spoke of victories and mistakes, of hope and despair, and Elias felt like he was hearing the soul of a civilization in the form of words and light. The longer he listened, the more he understood the depth of what he was seeing. It was not just beauty that drew him, it was the story, it was the pain and love and courage packed into the life of beings he would never meet except through her memory. And he realized that beauty alone could never explain the pull. He felt it was empathy, it was connection, it was the understanding that even across galaxies life could touch life in ways beyond flesh. She asked him about humans, about the worlds he came from, and he described cities and spaceships and colonies on distant moons. He told her about the longing to explore the unknown, and she listened with attention that made him feel seen, as if he were the first human she had truly known. She smiled softly, and in that smile he felt an entire history of his own species welcomed and acknowledged in her quiet gaze. Elias wandered through the ruins with her beside him. Though she floated slightly above the ground, he felt her presence like warmth at his side. She guided him to halls filled with energy crystals and murals of people with faces frozen in light. He could almost feel them moving under the glow, as if they remembered their own lives. Through her touch, through her voice, he began to understand that the planet was a memory itself, preserved for someone like him. The connection grew stronger as the hours passed. He spoke of dreams of humans reaching stars, of creating things that could last, and she told him that her people had tried similar things, that knowledge alone could not save a civilization, only empathy and courage could, and that even the smallest life could carry greatness if it dared to see and act. She made him feel that the universe was not a place of cold emptiness, but of potential. Elias thought of the time he had spent alone in space before crashing here, of the silence that had filled his vessel, and the endless dark he had drifted through. Now all of it seemed like preparation for this meeting. He felt a warmth in his chest he had never known before, a sense that his life was no longer only his own, but part of something larger, something that could not be measured by years or distance, but by understanding and care. Lyra showed him a chamber deep in the ruins where crystals glowed in patterns like constellations in the sky. He felt drawn to touch them, but she guided his hand over the shapes, and he felt pulses of thought passing into him, tiny pieces of memory of her people. He gasped at the sensations. They were not painful, but overwhelming. The depth of history passing into a single human mind was a gift and a test. He was being trusted with something far greater than survival. As he withdrew his hand, he realized he could sense her presence in ways he had never imagined. He could feel her curiosity, Her longing and even her caution, it was as if the planet itself had trained him to be ready for her, and he understood that beauty alone did not define her. It was the light in her knowledge, in her memory, in the way she could connect with him across the gap of time and space. The sky above the ruins began to shift, showing faint colors that did not exist on any human planet. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and he understood without words that this moment was fleeting, that she could not stay like this forever. She told him that soon the energy that preserved her consciousness would fade unless anchored in a living mind. Someone would have to carry her memory and thoughts forward, or she would disappear, leaving only crystals behind. Fear gripped him, and yet he did not move away. He wanted to ask what would happen if he failed, if he could not keep her alive inside himself. But the fear was tempered by awe, by the sense that being here meant more than survival. It meant being part of something eternal. She smiled at him gently, and in that smile he found courage he did not know. He had found the certainty that he must do something to preserve the knowledge and the soul that had trusted him. Time passed unnoticed. The light shifted, and the planet seemed to hum softly as if approving of their bond. He realized that he no longer thought of himself as alone, even when the wind blew through broken towers, even when the shadows deepened in the halls of memory. He felt her there beside him, a companion. Not flesh but mind, a friend, not born of the same species, but tied by trust and wonder. He whispered her name for the first time, feeling the words resonate with the planet and with the light around them. Lyra turned slightly, her eyes meeting his, and he saw recognition and something like joy. He'd never imagined a meeting with a being so different could feel so intimate. He felt the pulse of life in him expand, as if he were not only human, but a vessel for something greater, and the thought filled him with awe. Elias understood then that beauty was not in the form alone, it was in the connection, in the willingness to be vulnerable to the unknown, to see and understand, to hold memory as sacred. And he felt a surge of hope for humanity and for her people, that somewhere in the vast cosmos understanding could be found, that small lives could touch greater ones, and that the universe was waiting for those who dared to care. The ruins grew darker as the sky shifted colors unseen by human eyes, and Elias felt a tension in the air that made his chest tighten. He walked carefully beside Lyra, feeling the pull of the planet and of the being who had become more than memory to him. She guided him toward a hall filled with taller crystals, their glow stronger than anything he had seen before. Lyra spoke softly, her voice carrying both warning and hope. She told him that the essence of her people was scattered across the planet, and that each crystal contained part of their soul. Time had thinned their presence, and soon the energy sustaining her consciousness would fade unless anchored to something alive. She needed him, and in her words, he felt the weight of the universe pressing on his shoulders. Elias looked at her and felt a storm of emotions. Fear, desire, awe, and responsibility clashed within him. She was offering him a chance to preserve not only her, but an entire civilization, a chance that came with a cost. He did not fully understand yet. Every instinct in him knew he could not refuse. He had traveled across galaxies for discovery, yet this was no ordinary discovery. This was life intertwined with life across time. Lyra extended her hand toward a shard glowing brighter than the rest, and as he approached, the energy surged through him. A rush of images filled his mind, the rise and fall of her civilization, the joy and sorrow of lives lived long before humans had set foot in space. He staggered and held his head, his thoughts racing. He realized the choice was not simple. To merge with her would mean sharing his mind, opening himself to centuries of memory, some of it painful, some of it joyful. He felt a flicker of doubt. What if he failed? What if the merging destroyed him? What if the knowledge was too much for a human mind to carry? Yet he looked at her eyes, bright as stars, and felt a sense of trust that he had never known. She was not asking him to take a life, but to give himself fully to something beyond his own understanding, a gift and a challenge wrapped in one. The halls around them began to hum louder, the crystals pulsing in rhythm as if urging him to decide. Time was short. The energy sustaining her flickered, warning him that the moment would not last forever. He took a deep breath and felt the warmth of her presence brush against him. Even though she remained slightly above the floor, he felt her hand as if it had touched his heart. He realized then that the connection between them was already unbreakable. Even if he turned away, Elias knelt before the shard. She guided his hand over it, and he felt the surge of memory and thought pass into him like a river that could not be stopped. He gasped, feeling lives of beings he would never meet flooding his mind. The rush was overwhelming, and yet there was clarity. He understood the story of her people, their mistakes and triumphs, their courage and their despair. He felt their hopes and fears, as if they were his own, and the realization made him tremble. She whispered softly that this was only the beginning, that the choice was still his, and he must decide whether to anchor her fully or leave her as she was to fade with the planet and the centuries that had kept her alive in fragments. He closed his eyes and let the weight of responsibility settle on him. It was terrifying, yet it was also beautiful to be trusted with something so immense. Elias thought of humanity, the small fragile species that had sent him into the stars. Alone, he thought of the colonies and the struggles, and the longing to connect and create and survive. He understood then that he was being given a chance to prove what humans could do, not by conquest but by empathy, by courage, and by willingness to embrace something far greater than oneself. The planet shivered around him, the crystals flickered brighter, and he felt Lyra's consciousness reaching out as if testing his resolve. He opened his eyes and looked at her fully. She smiled, not with playfulness, but with recognition. She saw his heart and knew he had felt the depth of the choice, the pull of possibility, and the fear of loss. She did not demand the decision. She only showed him what it would mean to embrace it. Elias rose slowly, his mind still overflowing with centuries of memory. He felt a surge of clarity. He realized that the cost would be pain, and perhaps a part of himself would be lost, but that loss was nothing compared to the chance to preserve life, to carry hope forward. He stepped closer to Lyra and extended his hand, fully willing to take the step he knew was dangerous and necessary. Air shimmered as their hands met. Even though she had no flesh, the connection was immediate, energy flowing between them in pulses gentle yet overwhelming. He felt flashes of her world again, waves of light and sound passing into his mind. He staggered, but held firm. The choice was made, and yet the merging had just begun. The process demanded every bit of courage. He had to anchor her fully. Elias felt the first real test as the memories of a civilization crashed into him, waves of emotion and history, threatening to drown his own thoughts. He held on, desperately drawing strength from his own humanity, from the understanding that this was not only about survival, but about connection, about being the bridge between two lives and two worlds. He could feel Lyra responding to him, stabilizing the flow of energy as they intertwined. Time became meaningless. He felt centuries of emotion swirl together, joy and pain mingling as one. He saw visions of her people, building cities of light, of exploring stars, of daring to be more than their fate. Aloud he felt the loneliness that had stretched across ages, and the hope that someone would finally listen to their story. He understood that the beauty of the encounter was not in her form, but in the depth of understanding and trust they shared. Crystals around them began to resonate brighter, a soft hum filling the halls. Elias felt the merging intensify, and a part of him trembled at the thought that he might be consumed. Yet he did not falter. He whispered to himself that he would hold on for both of them, that he would honor the trust she had placed in him, that the legacy of a people would not fade because he was willing to embrace it. Finally, as he felt the surge of energy peak, he realized the bond was complete. She was anchored within him fully, and yet she remained, her own consciousness speaking softly to him, thoughts and words mingling, their awareness intertwined, but distinct. He could feel her joy and relief at being preserved, and a sense of pride that a human could rise to the challenge of connection across time and space. Elias sank to the floor, feeling the hum of energy fade into a gentle warmth. He looked at her, and even though she remained a being of light, he felt her presence inside Him like a pulse in his chest, he smiled, weakly exhausted and exhilarated at once. He had made the choice, he had embraced the responsibility. And in doing so, he had become part of something greater than himself, something eternal. The energy around them pulsed stronger than anything Elias had felt before. His body trembled as the merging intensified. The memories of Lyra's people surged through his mind like a tide. He could not stop. Waves of joy and sorrow crashing together in an endless stream. He felt their victories and defeats, their laughter and their grief, and for a moment, he thought he might be overwhelmed entirely. Lyra's presence guided him, yet even with her support, the flood of consciousness was relentless. Every crystal on the walls glowed brighter, casting shadows that danced like the spirits of a long-lost civilization. He staggered and grasped at the shards of the hall, trying to anchor himself to his own body, to keep from being swept away by the depth of memory. He had volunteered for this merging, but he had not expected the intensity of centuries condensed into a single moment. Pain and beauty intertwined in his mind. He saw the cities of her people rise from nothing into towering structures of light. He felt their pride and ambition, and then their despair as they fell into silence. The knowledge of loss weighed on him, yet he also sensed their hope, their longing for someone to witness them, and he realized that it was not only his life at stake, it was the survival of countless stories, lives that could not speak themselves anymore. Lyra's voice echoed within him, soothing and guiding. She whispered thoughts of reassurance, of trust, of courage. She reminded him that he was not alone, that his mind and heart were capable of carrying more than he believed, that the beauty of existence was not measured in form, but in connection and understanding. With that guidance, Elias felt a surge of strength. He drew on the courage that had brought him across galaxies and into these ruins, and he held on tighter to the flow of energy. The merging tested everything he was. Every memory of his own life collided with hers. Memories of entire civilizations, each demanding attention. His mind ached with the weight of it, yet he realized that surrendering to the process was not defeat. It was acceptance. Acceptance that life was more than his own existence, that love and understanding could bridge species and time, and that he was the vessel chosen to bear this gift forward. The ruins themselves seemed to respond to the merging. The walls hummed a low vibration. The crystals shimmered like stars in a living galaxy. The air vibrated with energy. Elias felt the heartbeat of a long-forgotten world, and it terrified him yet thrilled him at the same time. He could sense the pulse of Lyra's people flowing through him, the stories intertwining with his own thoughts like threads in a vast tapestry stretching across the cosmos. Hours, or perhaps moments passed. He could not tell time as memory and consciousness intertwined. He felt exhaustion gripping every part of him, yet he refused to release his hold. He whispered to Lyra's essence that he would not let her fade, that he would carry her fully, even if it took all of his strength. The pulse of energy responded to his vow, and he felt her gratitude flowing into him like sunlight through ice, a warmth that steadied his trembling body and mind. At the peak of the merging, pain flared. A searing light filled his mind. He saw visions of loss and devastation. The final moments of her civilization replayed with vivid clarity. The cries of those who had fallen, the silent screams of the forgotten, echoed, and for a brief moment he feared he could not endure the weight of their sorrow. Yet he remembered her trust, the hope that had been placed upon him, and he clung to it with everything he had. Then he felt a balance forming within him, his mind adapting to the influx of memory, his own thoughts coexisting with hers, a rhythm, a merging that allowed him to breathe, even in the storm of consciousness. He realized that he could hold both worlds, the human and the alien, the living and the remembered. He felt exhilaration mingled with relief, and a profound sense of awe at the vastness of existence and the fragile strength of life. Lyra spoke gently inside him, her words a balm and a celebration. She shared glimpses of her people's joy, their music and laughter, the moments of light that had endured across centuries. She had trusted him fully, and now that trust was rewarded with connection, a bond that no distance or time could sever. She showed him visions of galaxies, her civilization had dreamed of exploring, and in those visions, he understood the scale of what they had once been. Elias felt tears stream down his face, though he knew Lyra would not see them. The depth of emotion was overwhelming. The beauty and tragedy combined to create a feeling of wholeness he had never known. He whispered to her and thought that he understood that he would carry them together, that her legacy would live within him. And she responded with a pulse of light that filled his chest with warmth and certainty. As the merging stabilized, the halls around them glowed with a soft, harmonious energy. The crystals radiated in patterns that seemed to celebrate the success of the bond. The planet itself seemed to sigh with relief. The long wait was over, and the first human had embraced the gift of her people fully. Elias rose unsteadily, his body exhausted, yet his mind alight with consciousness, not only his own, but hers, intertwined in ways beyond ordinary understanding. He walked through the hall with a new awareness. Every detail was richer, every sound more layered. He felt the presence of countless memories supporting him, guiding him. The merging had changed him profoundly, yet it had also completed something that had waited for centuries. The connection was not only a preservation, it was a transformation. He was now a bridge, a carrier of legacy and understanding across time and species. Lyra's presence within him was like a heartbeat in sync with his own, a pulse of consciousness that shared thought and vision without overshadowing either one. She spoke of gratitude, of joy, of hope that humanity might one day reach the heights her people had dreamed of, and that through him their story would continue. A sense of duty and wonder filled him. He realized that he had become both protector and witness. The sky outside the ruins shimmered as if celebrating the completion of the merging. Colors that humans could not name painted the heavens, and Elias felt that, for the first time in his life, he was truly part of something eternal, something greater than his own existence, yet intimately tied to it. He smiled weakly, feeling both the weight and the beauty of what he carried. He knew now that the journey would continue, that he could not return simply to the life he had left behind. Yet he did not fear it, because he carried not only the memories of a lost civilization, but the understanding that connection was the essence of life, and that even across the vastness of space, trust and courage could create bonds that would endure beyond death and beyond time. Elias whispered softly, though not for her alone, but for the universe. She is with me now, and I will honor her and her people. He felt the warmth of her presence inside him, a constant reassurance that the merging had been successful, that the sacrifice had been worth it, and that together they had achieved something that neither could have done alone. The ruins glowed, and the planet hummed as if acknowledging that at last the waiting had ended. Elias stood at the edge of the ruins, feeling the pulse of life within him. He could sense Lyra in every thought and memory, flowing like light through his mind. He had survived the merging, the storm of centuries, and now carried not only his own consciousness, hers intertwined. They were no longer separate, yet each remained distinct, feeling each other as both companion and guide. He breathed deeply the air of the alien world and felt a sense of peace he had never known. The sky above shimmered in colors he could barely name, as if celebrating the success of their bond. The crystals around the halls radiated a soft glow, casting long shadows across the broken stone. Elias walked through them, feeling each pulse of memory as both guidance and presence. He could hear the laughter and music of a civilization long gone, carried in whispers of thought and light that resonated inside him. He smiled softly, realizing that he had become more than himself. Lyra spoke inside him, sharing stories of her people. Not just their triumphs, but the simple moments of joy, a child reaching for sunlight, a musician playing beneath towers of light, a love shared across generations, all of it preserved now in him. He felt gratitude, not only for the opportunity to preserve her memory, but for the connection they had forged. A human and a being of light, together bridging centuries and species, moved toward his ship, the vessel that had carried him across uncharted space. It now seemed small against the vastness of what he carried, yet he knew it would take him home and beyond, not simply to return to human colonies, but to carry the story forward to those who could understand and learn from the legacy of her people. He ran his fingers along the control panels, feeling a surge of energy that was both his and hers, guiding his hands and mind as he prepared for departure. He felt the quiet hum of the ruins. One last time, the crystals pulsing gently as if thanking him for embracing the responsibility, for becoming the keeper of a civilization's memory. He looked back at the hall where she had first appeared, her glow faint but unmistakable. He whispered softly in thought that he would honor her and all she represented, that her legacy would not fade in silence but live on through him. The ship lifted from the surface, carried by engines, and the steady hand of a man transformed. Elias looked out at the planet below, the colors of the sky shifting with a beauty he had never imagined. He felt the pulse of Lyra's consciousness guiding him through space, showing him the constellations her people had charted in dreams she shared, visions of distant galaxies, and he realized that though she had never lived in the human sense, she had lived fully through memory and thought, and now together they would continue the journey. Elias's mind was alive with possibilities. He thought of the colonies waiting for news of the lost explorer. They would see a man returning alone, yet he knew he carried far more than a single life. He carried wisdom, patience, and understanding from an entire species. He could feel Lyra's pride in his resolve and her gentle encouragement, guiding him toward decisions he would make for the good of humanity and the preservation of memory. Days passed as he traveled between stars, yet he felt no loneliness. Instead, he felt the constant presence of Lyra inside him. Every thought she shared, every vision of her people, expanding his own understanding of life and connection. He spoke to her, sometimes aloud and sometimes in thought, sharing memories of his own childhood, of Earth, of the people he had loved and lost, and she listened with a patience and warmth that made him feel fully alive. Began to document everything, sensing that one day others might need to understand the depth of what he had experienced. The merging, the preservation, the bond between human and alien consciousness. He wrote of courage and empathy, of the beauty of life across the stars, of trust and the willingness to embrace the unknown. He understood that humanity could grow not only through science and exploration, but through heart and understanding, and that he was living proof of that lesson. Elias stopped at a distant colony, sending messages encrypted with knowledge of the merging, his words careful and full of meaning, yet only understandable to those who had patience to learn and wisdom to appreciate. He hoped that someday others would encounter what he had carried, and that they too would learn to value connection above conquest, to see beauty not only in form, but in courage and understanding across the vastness of existence. Looked out at the stars and whispered once again, this time aloud. She was with him in every pulse of thought, in every memory he carried, in every decision he made, and he realized that the most beautiful thing he had ever seen was not her form, but the depth of life she had shared with him, the trust she had given, and the knowledge that he could hold it all and preserve it as a testament to what humans and others could achieve. When they dared to carry, Elias felt hope rise within him, stronger than fear or doubt. He knew the journey would be long and filled with challenges, yet he had been changed forever. He carried not only himself, but an entire civilization inside his mind and heart, guiding him, illuminating the way forward. He knew that the galaxy was larger and stranger than anyone could imagine, and that life could be more beautiful when shared across boundaries and time. The stars stretched endlessly before him, yet he felt not lost, but empowered. He whispered softly one last time to Lyra in thought, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever known, and I will never forget you." Her presence pulsed warmly in response, a soft affirmation that their bond was eternal, that the sacrifices had been worth it, and that together they had created a legacy that could never fade. Elias smiled. He adjusted the controls of his ship and allowed it to glide through the void, knowing that the universe was vast and full of stories yet to be discovered. He carried one of the greatest stories ever told, not in words alone, but in memory and connection, in trust and courage, and a bond between two beings who had met across time and space. And through that bond, humanity had gained a legacy brighter than any star he had ever seen. As the ship disappeared into the distance, the planet below faded into silence. Yet the light of its memory continued inside Elias. He felt the warmth of centuries and the beauty of a people who had once dreamed and loved and hoped, and through him, their story would continue, a whisper of life carried across the galaxy. And he knew that though the journey had begun alone, it would never truly be solitary again, for he and Lyra were one, and together they would walk the stars, carrying the legacy of the past into the future. The end.